Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! This will be a long one. I've been reading all these amazing little gems of revenge stories for a long time, and I just remembered one of my own greatest hits I wanted to share. Some years ago, me and a few friends of mine were living together in this old but really fancy three-story house. The owner of the house had walled off all the stairways and made 3 apartments, one for each floor, and we lived in the middle of the ground floor. As this was an old house, soundproofing was really not a thing, but it was never a problem until both the tenants above and below us moved out, and next ones appeared out of the blue one night. This story is about the 4 to 8 guys living in a 4-bedroom collective in the attic. Not a joke. I never did figure out just how many were actually living in that tiny space. From the very first night they showed up, the non-existent soundproofing became very apparent, and we quickly understood that this might become an issue if not addressed. So after a few days we rang their doorbell and introduced ourselves and really tried to greet them as friendly neighbors, making sure to be very polite and welcoming. And at the same time we brought up the non-existent soundproofing and asked very nicely if they could keep that in mind and that we would be very grateful. Of course, at this point they were all smiles and agreed right away to keep the noise down on weekdays nights. And in return we would not complain about music and partying on the weekends. After all we wanted was to sleep in peace when we had work in the morning. That did not last long. I will spare you all the friendly and not so friendly and passive-aggressive ways we tried to find a solution to our problem. Let's just say there were a myriad of attempts made to solve this peacefully. Eventually, I flat out told them that I would no longer take our noise complaints to them, the manager of the apartments or the owner of the house, and I explained that according to our laws, excessive noise after a certain time on weekdays was in fact illegal. Although common sense and decency usually made this a non-issue, and in the future I would take our complaints to the police instead. And I got laughed at for it. Now comes the revenge part. We all knew that some of the guys upstairs were dealing with all kinds of fun stuff, and when I met someone I knew through workout in the parking lot heading for the attic with a wad of cash, I got all the intel I needed. And so I waited for the weekend to pass, and you could probably have guessed it. The following Monday night they had a big party still going strong well in the AM, and by the smells and the smoke that wafted out of the open windows, I knew this was my moment. I called the non-emergency number for the police, registered my complaint, and gave some backstory. The nice lady on the other end was very understanding and said a patrol car would come around in a little while. I thanked her and said I would meet them outside. About an hour or so later the patrol car pulled up and I went outside for a chat. And being the helpful citizen I am, I explained that the doorbell was busted. It wasn't, but a stairway in the backyard would take them up on a balcony outside of the upstairs living room where the party was at. The officer thanked me and I walked back inside our apartment while grinning from ear to ear. I knew what was about to happen, and it was going to be glorious. While I was posted in a window overlooking the parking lot, this night quickly turned into the best sleepless night I have ever had. One of the officers remained by the front door, while 2 more went around the back. Now, I don't know why there were 3 officers in one car. Usually there are only 2, but in a moment you will understand why that was very lucky. The music got turned off a minute or 2 later, and just like as if there was a fire, people, backpacks and other objects started flying out of every door and window all at the same time. I could hear a whole lot of shouting through the floor, and the officer by the front door was literally blocking the doorway, trying to stem the massive flow of people trying to flee the scene. I made sure to take note of where the backpacks and bags that were thrown out landed, where there were tall grass and such, and kept listening, watching and really wishing I had a tub of popcorn. Things calmed down pretty quickly after that, but the officers didn't come back out, so I stayed by the window, and soon another patrol car pulled up, then another, then one of those big ones for transporting uncooperative people. and another big one soon after that. You get the picture. After watching the parade of people in handcuffs disappearing into cars and being driven away, and waiting a bit to make sure everything was over, I went back outside and called over the officer I talked to earlier. Hey, I don't really know what just happened and I'm sure I don't want to know, but in case you are interested, I saw some backpacks or something fly from upstairs and into that field over there. I can point out the general area if you'd like. That was a lie, of course, but being the dutiful citizen I am, I felt it was important to make sure they didn't miss anything. It could be important. A little bit of searching later and the remaining officers left with a small pile of backpacks and bags, and I went to bed with a big smile on my face. Quiet at last. There is a little more to the aftermath, but this post is already long enough. I never saw some of them again before I moved away, and the ones remaining were a lot more considerate of our need for sleep. As I was sitting in my wheelchair minding my own business at the mall, I saw her approaching me. She was dressed in designer clothes and had a sense of entitlement in her demeanor. At first, I thought she was going to ask for directions or maybe even offer to help me out. But to my surprise, she asked if she could use my wheelchair. She said she was feeling a bit tired and didn't feel like wandering through the aisles on foot. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wheelchair is not just a means for transportation for me. It's my lifeline. It's how I get around and do everyday tasks. The thought of someone else using it, especially for something as trivial as feeling tired, made me feel violated. I'm sorry, but that's not something I can do for you, I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. That wheelchair is necessary for me to get around. It is how I do everyday tasks and go about my life. I can't just give it up for you to use. It's not a toy or a prop for you to use when you feel tired. I could see the surprise and disappointment on her face. She clearly did not expect this answer and didn't understand the gravity of her request. But she didn't take my answer kindly. She became aggressive and raised her voice, demanding that I give her my wheelchair. I can't believe you're being so selfish. I'm tired and I want to use your wheelchair, so you should just give it to me, she exclaimed. I felt so uncomfortable and frightened. I didn't know how to react. I knew that this woman had no right to take my wheelchair and I didn't want to give in to her demands. But she didn't stop there. She tried to forcefully drag me out of my wheelchair and take it for herself. Luckily, another customer who witnessed the whole thing stepped in and stopped her. The customer confronted her and tried to reason with her, but she didn't listen. The commotion got the attention of the mall manager, who arrived at the scene and called the cops. The police arrived quickly, and upon hearing the situation, they immediately understood that this woman was trying to steal my wheelchair. They listened to my side of the story and took action. They arrested her for attempting to steal my wheelchair and for attempting to physically harm me. And I, of course, decided to press charges. I was shaken but relieved that the situation was handled and that I was able to continue my shopping. However, I couldn't stop thinking about how entitled and dismissive Karen had been, and how she had tried to take away something that was so essential to my independence and physically harm me. I couldn't believe that someone could be so cruel and thoughtless. For the uninitiated, the house next door is haunted by a living woman who is fixated on bringing the bins in by 9 a.m. because they make the street look messy. My partner Martin nicknamed her the Bucket Woman because of this pink curfew, as he said it was like living next door to the Hyacinth Bucket. Our Bucket Woman has been known to blockade driveways with empty bins to drive home her point. Another piece of relevant background. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been having an allergic reaction to something outdoors, so I've been staying inside. Good news is, it's gotten under control and I think we've worked out what plant it is. Bad news is, for Martin anyway, I'm permanently excused from weeding. Since I was staying indoors, I didn't bring any of the bins in. Bucket Woman hovered around, repeatedly checking the bins and getting more frustrated. I went about my business, looking after our new human. Okay, I was sleep deprived due to noisy wild creatures, and if someone even looked at me wrong, there was going to be a smoking hole in the universe. When Martin came home, he brought most of the bins in, except for the recycling bin which hadn't been emptied. He reported it to the council as a missed delivery, using their whip form because the council offices were closed. Now here is the important bit. The council instruction is to leave the bin out until it's collected. So that's what we did. Cue Martin's first act of pettiness. He attached a neat sign to the bin lid, saying something like, "Missed delivery, reported to council," and the date. That didn't stop the bucket woman from checking the recycling bin several times, each time getting a bit more aggressive and slamming the lid back down again and flouncing off. This went on all weekend. Outside, periodically stuck to the bin, fling the lid open, peer inside, make a dramatic gesture, slam the lid shut, flounce off. Inside, ignore with the occasional snigger. Cue Martin's second act of pettiness. He added another sign. "Leave the bin alone, Hyacinth." Only he used the real name. The replacement delivery happened on Monday. I was out, and when I got home I had a tired new human and groceries to wrangle, so I left it. Martin normally deals with any bins out when he gets home, but today he wanted to come inside first and talk about our days, so he left the bin too. We were in the front room when we heard the sound. Martin ran out the front door and down the path, with new human and I following. The bin was lying on its side in the road, and the bucket woman was hopping around on one leg. In complete silence, Martin opened the gate, glared at the bucket woman, his angry face is terrifying, picked up the bin and put it back. The lid was broken. Martin glared at the bucket woman again. Bucket woman attempted the dignified hopple back next door. Still in silence, Martin went back inside. The new human and I followed. After a few minutes in the office, Martin came out again, holding two new signs. Broken bin reported to council, and the date. And the sign too says, "Do not damage council property, Hyacinth." We don't have to leave the broken bin out until it's collected, but we are anyway because we're petty like that. Recycling is collected fortnightly. I have not seen this with my own eyes, but apparently Bucketsy is on crutches. The story doing the rounds is she stopped her big toe on something and broke it. I say nothing, but my smirk is worthy of a politician. The 5-minute early post reminded me of a story that happened to a friend of mine. Let's call him Bobby. Bobby was a CNC machinist, a good one and the only one. The company he worked for made an intricate product, and his CNC part was crucial. The rest of the product bolted onto it. The finished product sold for tens of thousands of dollars. It took 3 hours to make this piece. Bobby would make 3 a day, and he'd make 1 in the morning, take his coffee break, then make another, and take his lunch break. That ate up about 6 3/4 hours. He'd stay late to make the third parts and make 2 hours overtime. His new foreman turned out to be more than a bit of a jerk. He tried to get Bobby to do other tasks, and Bobby said no, as he needed to monitor the CNC machine during all stages of the cycle. Foreman whined to the plant manager, who told him to back off and leave Bobby alone. One day there was a bad snowstorm, and Bobby was 10 minutes late. The foreman was there to greet him at the time clock with a big grin on his face, holding a demerit slip. Bobby had clocked in a minute late the previous week, and the union rule said that if you were late twice within 14 days, you got 20 demerit points. Bobby and foreman got into a bit of an animated conversation, and the union steward came over and said that Bobby had no choice but to take the demerit hit. So Bobby went to work. His shift was 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., but he usually stayed until 6:30 to finish the last part. Not today. At 4:30, he shut the machine down and headed for the door. The next morning, foreman comes over and says that the assembly team is a short part. "Yeah, I know. I'm working on it right now. It'll be done in 2 hours. But they need 3 a day. Why didn't you make 3 of them yesterday?" "Well, because my shift is over at 4:30, and I went home." "What? You stay every night until the third part is finished?" Bobby pulled a demerit slip out of his shirt pocket, looked Foreman in the eye and said, "Not anymore." Bobby had done the math. Every week, instead of getting 15 parts, they were getting 10 or 11. Foreman tried to sweep it under the rug, but within a few days, chaos ensued. The assemblers had no core part, and their team went to the plant manager to let him know that production was falling. The assemblers liked it. They got to hang around yakking while they waited for the next CNC part to arrive. Eventually, there was a meeting with the plant manager, the foreman, the union steward, and Poppy. The foreman tried to throw Poppy under the bus, saying that he refused overtime. The union steward pointed out that, as per the contract, mandatory overtime was only in case of emergencies, and this wasn't an emergency. Bobby had every right to decline the overtime. The foreman lost his temper, started yelling at Bobby and the union steward, and was asked to leave the meeting. The plant manager knew he was screwed and looked at Bobby and asked, "What is it going to take to get you to work the overtime?" Bobby smiled and replied, "As long as this foreman is my supervisor, I won't be working a minute of overtime." And that was the last anyone saw the foreman. By sticking to the contract, Bobby cost the company a handful of parts worth many thousands of dollars and put the company into a position where their lowered production would cost them even more. In perpetuity, Bobby worked a couple of Saturdays to catch up and made double time for those shifts. They hired a new foreman who was explicitly instructed, "Do not, under any circumstances, mess with Bobby." This happened in 2019 when the infamous last season of Game of Thrones came out. Back then I was working an annoying customer service job, and because I was a student at the time, had to work late afternoon/night shifts. The company being permanently understaffed, there were usually 2 people on these type of shifts. In this case, yours truly and the person we'll call Jerkwad, who also worked mostly graveyard shifts. I can write an entire book of stories about Jerkwad that would showcase the reasoning behind this name, but I'll save them for later. The bottom line is this dude barely ever showed up to work, and when he did show up, he would call his friends from the company phones and keep the line busy or just spend all his time eating and watching movies. Besides refusing to work, this guy was also incredibly rude and entitled. What I know is he came from money and his parents made him work and he was not amused. He was 20-ish if I remember correctly, but he threw tantrums like a 3-year-old. Now night shifts were usually quiet and both me and Jerkwad each minded our own business, but it wasn't the case that week. Some service was down somewhere and calls were flooding in, to the point where I barely had time to breathe between calls. At some point I noticed Jerkwad's phone has been disconnected. He's logged off and opened HBO to watch the Game of Thrones season premiere. While hundreds of calls and emails keep coming in, I go over to him and ask him to please do his damn job. And his response is, "Chill, it won't take long. I just really want to know what happens in this episode." I didn't have the time to yell at this idiot, and even if I had, it would have been useless. What I did instead is I went back to my workstation and messaged him what happened throughout the course of the entire episode, scene by scene, on Slack and email, with our team leader CC then. He slammed the keyboard and went back to taking calls. It made me feel better, but not good enough. I knew his university schedule wouldn't allow him to watch the episodes right as they came out, so every week I would religiously email and Slack him a message containing all the spoilers titled Game of Thrones Summary. I hope this helps you concentrate on work. Was it petty and childish? Yes. Was it delicious and beautiful? Also yes. Do I regret it? No. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.